What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of 10X Recruiting, brought to you by MetaView. I am your host, Nolan Church. We normally have Sile Magos, who's the CEO of MetaView, on with me, but he's European. It's like close to the summer. He's probably on vacation somewhere. So you're stuck with me today. Today on the show, we had GEM's CEO, Steve Bartel, on, and it's an awesome episode. Here are my 3 takeaways. Number 1, most startups hire the wrong engineers. Steve told this amazing story about previously to GEM, he was hiring a lot of back-end and infra-focused engineers. And he thought, well, I've done it before. I'll do it again. When I come to GEM, let's go hire these same type of people. And it turned out he actually needed more product-focused full stack engineers. And after they made that shift, they had a dramatic increase in how they got things done. And they were a lot more customer obsessed. A second learning is that those same engineers, he forced them all to do customer support. Now, this is a learning I've shared before, which is at DoorDash, everybody in the company had to dash once a month. And the reason you want to do this, especially for engineers, is because you want them close to the customer. And when they can tangibly feel the pain that a customer feels, they're much more likely to start making changes. The last learning I have for you is called the connector node trick. And so Steve, you've been running GEM, which was initially thought of as an outbound sourcing company. And so the connector node trick is essentially when you go outbound to a candidate and you refer a mutual candidate or mutual friend that you have with that candidate. And so by doing that, if the candidate sees, they're like, that's kind of interesting. Like they referred this friend that I know. Let me go check with that person first. And if they say something positive about you, which they should, and you should check with them first, Steve and I go deep into the dynamics of this, then they're much more likely to get back to you. So those are my 3 takeaways. There's a ton of gold in this episode. You guys are going to love it. Here is my episode of 10X Recruiting brought to you by MetaView with Steve Bartel. Hope you guys enjoy it. This is 10X Recruiting, a podcast from MetaView. Let's get after it. Steve, what's up, man? Welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
All right. So I was doing some LinkedIn stalking before this conversation. And one of my favorite posts of yours goes like this. When I started GEM, I realized that exceptional technical talent alone wasn't enough. What we needed was more product and customer-focused engineers. So how do you accomplish that at GEM? Because I think every hiring manager would likely agree with you.
Yeah, it's a great question. And a little bit of the backstory is I started my career at Dropbox. I joined when it was 25 people. It blew up to like 1,500 over the next 5 years. And Dropbox always had this super high bar on the recruiting and talent front. And they attracted some of the best infrastructure engineers in the world because they had all these really exciting and gnarly infrastructure problems to work on with, handling file sync for hundreds of millions of users. But when I started GEM, I realized, wow, like what we need from a technical talent standpoint is completely different. We're trying to build the very best, most usable product for recruiters and recruiting teams. I think it's really paid off because, we've got the highest G2 crowd scores in the industry, really world-class net promoter score, like more indicative of like a world-class consumer product versus like, your typical B2B SaaS enterprise solution, which let's be real, like most of the time, like B2B SaaS solutions end up being shelfware, like doesn't get like the utilization and adoption and value that is promised. And so we, from the very beginning, like wanted to make building a world-class product our super sauce, secret sauce rather. And although super sauce too, maybe. And we realized that like hiring world-class infrastructure engineers wasn't going to get us there. And so we really honed in on amazing product engineers, folks that got fired up about spending time talking to customers every day. Folks that maybe decided one day they would be excited to go start a company of their own one day. And we're excited about coming on board to GEM to like learn a whole lot more and operate not just in that narrow swim lane of being an engineer, but actually thinking from the customer standpoint and putting on their product hat and their design hat, and really built a team of like world-class full stack engineers, which I think helped us accomplish that goal of building product that recruiters love.
So how do you actually assess for it though? Right? Because there's a soundbite that all founders want to hire former founders because they've had to basically touch everything. Thus, like they're more empathetic to the user. How do you guys think about weaving that into your interview process?
I mean, it's great if you can just fill and stack your team with former founders, but there's not so many, and a lot of the best ones are running their companies, right? But what we did was actually pretty unique. I'm not sure it goes against the grain a little bit in terms of how folks think about evaluating technical talent, and it doesn't work every time. And it only works, I would say, if you have a strong network, folks that are good, that you've worked with in the past. What we did is we did these work trials with Gem for a lot of the early hires. And we didn't do it for everyone. Obviously, like not everybody can take 2 weeks or even 2 days to come work with a company, but most people have full-time jobs. But a lot of the folks that we were recruiting were people that had been early at Facebook, early at Dropbox, who were maybe in between things, thinking about what was next, had never done an early stage startup, and were like really excited to learn more about what that would feel like. And on our perspective, it was great because we got to have folks come in for 2-3 weeks, put them in front of customers, have them ship real features. And that was like such a cool experience for everyone involved. Like we got to see what their chops were like, but they got to get this like dopamine hit of talk to a customer, figure out what they want, build something for them, iterate really quickly. And they're like, whoa, working at a small startup is completely different and fun and fast and even better than I could imagine. And the reason this worked really well was not just because we got signal into whether they would be great, world-class, full-stack product engineers, but actually more importantly, they got signal into us. Because the single hardest part of like recruiting your founding team, and that extends to like even your next 50, 100 employees, is as a startup, you have very little talent brand, right? You don't really have much outside validation. You're a less known quantity. And so by doing these work trials, candidates were able to get a sense and a taste of what it would be like to work at Gem. And we became this super well-known quantity for them. And they became much more likely to accept.
Yep. And that's how you pitch it to people too, by the way, which is we're not just assessing you, like you should be assessing us. Like it's not just about us trying to recruit you at all costs. It's about the mutual fit. And
100%.
that's a world-class process. And I think actually more companies are finally starting to lean into that. The next piece of this though, Steve, is okay. So engineer joins, right? And it's important to you for these engineers to actually be interacting with customers. So what is it like after they're in the building and how do they interact with the customer once they're an employee?
Yeah, so in the early days, we had engineers doing a ton to interact with customers. We had them actually just directly talking to and riding along customer calls with me and my co-founder. Like we were spending a ton of our time talking to customers. And so we would just have this rotation of like which engineers got to shadow calls. And we had like every engineer has to have a certain number of calls that they shadow a month. We had a whole process built around that. And it was really cool because an engineer could spot something on a call, be like, oh, I know how to fix that. And then go back and take the initiative to go build that feature, ship it. Sometimes we were able to ship features for customers live on the call, which is wild, right? I remember we did that for the Slack team early on. We were on site and Drew, one of our first engineers, was like, oh, I could fix that. And he just like started coding in their office and shipped a feature within that hour-long call. And they were just blown away by the level of like customer focus and obsession and became one of our largest early customers. But we did a lot outside of just like directly riding along calls. Our engineering team was manning the customer support chat and emails for a long time. And we did that because we thought it would help everybody build empathy for what are the most common frustrating parts of the product. And it really helped us round out all the rough edges. I have a funny story of how one of our bigger customers tried to reverse recruit one of our engineers, if we want to get into that
Oh,
at
no
some
way.
point. But I think the other thing we did is, and we started using Gong pretty early on to record a lot of our customer calls. And so we created this fire hose of calls that people could go watch, shared in really interesting snippets and nuggets. And that's actually one of the ways we've been able to scale this out over time. Because once you have thousands of customers, engineers can't necessarily be on every call or talk to everyone. And then the last thing we did is we created a feedback Slack channel that all the engineers were in. And in the early days, it was just me and my co-founder posting feedback from calls that we were on, maybe sharing snippets of the Gong calls. But over time, as we started to build out a customer success team, a sales team, that became like the most active Slack channel at Gem. And the field loved it because whenever they would post impactful feedback, it would get actioned on super fast.
Totally. And it just keeps everybody close to the user and the user's problems versus building in the ivory tower, which I think is generally the fail state for engineering and product teams.
Totally.
Similarly, actually at DoorDash, I've told the story a few times, but everybody had to dash once a month or do customer support.
Yep.
And I've said this before, but I used to think it was like stupid. Like, why are we doing this? And then the next thing you know, specifically for recruiters even, right? We're talking about engineers, but even for recruiters, to get to that lowest level of detail to where you're actually interacting with the customer makes you understand better the type of candidate you need and that will be successful at the company. And so I actually advocate that not only just engineering and product teams do this, but also everybody in the company. Because the more you can do it, the closer you get to the customer, the better you understand what's actually going to work for the company. And I think it's a recipe for success.
Totally.
So let's talk about Gem more, right? So you guys are doing a lot. Give me an update quickly on where the product is and what you guys are currently building.
Sure. Yeah. So the product has evolved a ton. Like we started off by building out sourcing, CRM. We layered on analytics. We built a bunch around talent marketing, but a lot of Gem's focus was on the top of the funnel and how do you get passive talent to convert into the process, whether that was the sourcing for cold outbound and automating a lot of that, or the CRM that helped you build relationships with passive talent, branded email campaigns, recruiting events, like all the things that would help you attract and pull talent in. But over the last few years, we have completely evolved and reimagined what Gem is. And so now all the pieces have come together and we've got this really, really interesting position in the market where we're the only AI first all-in-one recruiting platform. And so that spans, of course, sourcing, CRM, but now scheduling automation as well, similar to like a Good Time or a Modern Loop or a Prelude. It spans all the talent marketing capabilities, ATS, which is coming along really fast and going super well, full funnel analytics that ties all the data and work that's happening at the top of the funnel, right? All the places where Gem has always been strongest with the data from your ATS. And then on top of all that, we've layered on a bunch of AI first products that work better together as part of being a part of this all-in-one recruiting platform. And so we've got this underlying AI foundation, which does really smart ranking and matching. So essentially, if you tell us, here's a job that I'm hiring for, here's 5 to 10 criteria that are most important for that job, we can use the new like LLM technology to match and rank profiles and resumes and public profiles against those 5 to 10 criteria.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's really, really cool. And then we apply that to 650 million plus public profiles, external profiles on the AI sourcing front. We apply that to your inbound application so that you can get through them so much more quickly. And then we apply that to candidate rediscovery so that you can go find folks from your CRM and your ATS that might be a good fit for this role. And the cool thing about it is you dial in and get really calibrated on the search with those 5 to 10 criteria once, and then it goes to work for you across all those channels. And the other really cool part about it is because Gem is one of the leading all-in-one recruiting platforms. We help our customers build the very best like source of truth for every talent relationship and every touch point. Because instead of having to deal with 10 different fragmented systems that are all disjointed, disconnected, poorly integrated, Gem is able to pull in every single relationship and touch point across all of these interactions, across all of these different products to piece together the first real source of truth in recruiting. And why is that important? Well, you wouldn't want an AI sourcing bot reaching out to somebody that your recruiting team was talking to 2 months ago, or that applied for a role and was rejected 5 months ago. And if they were to reach out, you'd want that AI sourcing bot taking into consideration all of the context of every talent relationship and touch point so that it could send a really hyper-personalized message to the effect of, hey, I saw you attended this recruiting event 15 months ago on AI and the future of AI. We think you'd be a great fit for this new machine learning role that we just opened up. Or, saw that, this person was in contact with you, or that you made it through the interview process for this other role. Now we're opening up this new role. And based on your interview feedback, we actually think you could be a really great fit for this new role we're opening up.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's so many problems right now in recruiting that you kind of just glossed over there. So like one is like the inbound, right? Everybody's talking about this right now. Sal and I just had an episode on fake candidates. Like there's so many fake candidates that are coming through. People are using AI to like pump their resume to basically everywhere. And I feel like every recruiting team is just completely underwater trying to manage the inbound when there could be good candidates and there should be a channel that we get value out of. And so are you saying like with the AI that you guys are building right now, you are trying to solve that problem by stacking and ranking that inbound
100%.
flow?
Yes, and actually, we have the data on this. We just published our most recent benchmark report. Applications are up 3x compared to where they were 2021, 2022. More than 20% of our customers get thousands of applicants for a single role. And then in the meantime, the recs per recruiter, the number of recs each recruiter is working, is up 55% because recruiting teams are a lot smaller.
Totally.
And then the work required to hire a single candidate is up 8 days in terms of time to fill, and 42% more interviews to lead to one hire. And a lot of that is most likely is hiring managers and companies are holding candidates to a higher bar than ever before with that increased focus on candidate quality and quality of hire. And so you add these things up, application volume through the roof, recruiters are working more recs, each rec is taking a lot more work to close, and it's this perfect storm of like recruiting teams are just completely underwater, and especially when it comes to applicants. And so, yeah, that's why we invested a ton into building out like the very best ranking and matching foundation that we can apply to inbound. And the cool thing about that is with all the time that recruiting teams are saving with inbound, then they can leverage the AI sourcing functionality to go find potentially even more qualified candidates that aren't applying and convert them into process.
So that piece of the software is using the criteria from the job description in addition to like people who like have gotten deep into the process. And then we're going outbound with some AI bot and it's just like showing up in my inbox of like people who I want to potentially now reach out to. How does that work?
Exactly. Yeah. So imagine this. So you kick off a new role. You've written your job description. Maybe you've used AI to help build the job description. And Gem suggests 5-10 criteria based on that job description. You can also import your spot doc or your intake doc with your hiring manager, and you can get it even better. In fact, the more information you feed it, the better the criteria. And of course, you have full visibility into what that criteria is. So as the recruiter, you can think a lot more strategically and say, hey, let me tweak these 3. Or let me add this one that's missing. Or let me drop this one. It's actually not that important, even though the hiring manager had it in the intake doc. And so from there, Gem immediately starts stack ranking your inbound and going to work from you. Now, of course, like maybe your inbound's not going to surface enough qualified candidates. So next, it goes and searches across your entire ATS, your entire CRM, for folks that have already raised their hand in the past, that are likely to be a lot warmer, to surface, the 50 to 100 most qualified shortlist of folks that you should re-engage with. And then from there, it uses that same criteria to start going outbound across 650 million public profiles to find hundreds of people a week, and starts to automate a lot of that engagement. Now, of course, the recruiter is still in full control every step of the way, reviewing the AI recommendations. But it's really cool and huge time saver. And as you start to calibrate the AI and refine your criteria, AI takes those learnings and applies them up to all three channels.
Yep. The other thing that's coming up as you're talking is thinking about what a lot of companies call the silver medalist process.
Yep.
So oftentimes companies get to the end of a process with multiple candidates. We're only extending one offer, and there's 2 to 3 people there that maybe we wanted to hire, but there was a better candidate for whatever reason. And as I've talked to people about this, they're basically just having a Google sheet and some sort of notification, analog notification, to go and check to see if there's any roles open for the silver medalist we've ever talked to. That feels like actually the perfect use case for AI.
100%. Yeah. And companies are sitting on top of this treasure trove. The ones that are doing it well, they're doing this highly manual process, like you mentioned, in a Google Sheet, or maybe they're using a Gem project for that today, if they're using Gem. But even the ones that are doing a good job of it are probably leaving tons and tons of qualified candidates
Totally
on the table, because you have to think to manually add them to a sheet in a project, and probably only 10% of the best qualified candidates are being added through that manual process. And so being able to leverage AI to search across every candidate, every prospect in your database is a huge unlock. Let me share this stat with you. So for an average mid-market customer, let's say in the 500 to few thousand employee range with Gem, anywhere from 30 to 50% of the people they hire were already in their CRM or their ATS. For an average enterprise customer, tens of thousands of employees or higher, that's 50 to 70%.
Wow.
Of the people they hire were already previously in their ATS or their CRM. Think about that for a second.
That makes intrinsic sense, right? Because I remember at Google, if I recall correctly, in 2013 or 14, we had 10 million applicants.
Right. And at a company like Google or Facebook, it's probably 95% of people that you care about are already in your system. And that data is just locked up and impossible to search across. But those are your hand raisers, and the previous context and relationship touch points that you've had with them. That's your superpower in to getting in contact with them, versus sending a canned cold email, or spending millions of dollars on ads to just get the same people that you already know into the process.
Totally. The other thing that's really resonating is just this life cycle of a candidate. And I think people think about it today as candidates engaged, the life cycle begins. And then candidate process ends. We didn't hire them, or they backed out. It's over. And I actually think the best recruiters think about this on an infinite time horizon. And this is where software has not met my expectations for how to do this. And this is where I think recruiters have really filled the gap with just shower thoughts, or while they're brushing their teeth, oh, I haven't talked to Steve recently. Let me just go check in with him and see what's up. The future actually needs to be, especially for these best candidates who we've identified, we've done the work, we know we want to hire them. We have to actually build the relationship as time goes on, because maybe they go to a competitor or a different job today. That doesn't mean 18 to 24 months from now that we might be interested in them. We actually might be, but we have to engage them the right way with the previous context and build upon the foundation, versus just starting at zero every time, which is how most companies and recruiting teams do it today.
100%. And that's why our unique perspective and what we're uniquely delivering to the market is the only AI first all-in-one recruiting platform. And because the thing that makes that all possible is having the entire relationship context and history for every talent relationship that you care about. And that's achieved by having the best all-in-one recruiting platform, which then powers all of the AI value on top of that.
Yep. And if you want the value, you need it. It's garbage in, garbage out, or quality in, quality out. That's the only way AI works.
100%.
Yep. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about outreach. So Gem obviously started as an outreach company. That's where I first interacted with you guys. And so I still think outreach today deeply matters. In fact, I think it matters more than ever because the best people typically are always employed. They're typically not looking. And so you have to catch their attention. So what does the best outreach look like? Like, what does world class look like?
You both have to catch their attention because they're not looking, and you have to stand out in a sea of generic AI emails that are getting flooded, right?
I didn't even think about that. You're so right. And it's getting probably worse by the day.
I know. AI is just going to make it really easy to spam the entire market, which I think is actually a miss for teams that are taking that approach, because they're just going to burn their talent brand to the ground if they're leveraging AI point solutions that aren't taking a personalized approach or don't know the full relationship history. So it's only going to get harder. Now, there's a few things. There's the basics, of course, right? Sending a 4-stage sequence and using email instead of in-mail can increase your response rate by about 2x. You get a big boost, about 68% increase in positive response rate just from sending 3 follow-ups. And then you also get a big boost from sending email, because a lot of talent has their in-mail notifications off. Of course, like reaching out to personal email. And so that's been tried and true for a long time. All the data still supports that. On top of that, if you take a more personalized approach, right? Like forget company title, school name, tokens. Like those are kind of a given at this point. Everybody's using those. You get a tiny marginal lift, but you kind of have to do it. But if you take a much more personalized approach, you can get, I believe, customers that use Gem's AI to personalize today already see another 50, 60% increase and lift in response rate.
Wow.
And that's just based on taking in their resume or background and personalizing it to the job that you're recruiting for. We haven't even launched a lot of the stuff around the hyper personalization that factors in all of the previous touch points. We do factor that into your AI searches so that we can filter out people you shouldn't be reaching out to based on rules of engagement. But it's not even, those touch points aren't even factored into the hyper personalized. That's coming in a month or two. It's going to be awesome. But yeah, personalization goes a long way. And my perspective is the hyper personalization that teams are going to unlock from knowing the entire history and context about a candidate, that's going to be a lot more powerful over time than the resume to job personalization. Because there's just going to be tons of AI tools out there that can do that simple personalization and flood the market with emails. But this is a little bit future facing. Yep. The last thing, and this I think is going to become even more important, but even today, it's the highest ROI, most underutilized technique, is sending on behalf of a hiring manager or an exec. We find that increases response rate by up to 2x. Now, where you do it is really important. It's actually a lot more impactful to have the second stage or the third stage come from a hiring manager. Yeah, and it's actually way more impactful to have it be multi-contact outreach. So maybe stage 1 is from the recruiter, then stage 2 is from the hiring manager. Even better if you throw a VP in there for stage 3, but it creates this hyper-personalized approach where in stage 2, it's hey, I was catching up with Nolan on the recruiting team, and he was just super excited about your profile. So I wanted to reach out myself and let you know how thrilled we'd be to talk to you about
Totally. Yeah.
opportunity XYZ, right? So that approach is feels super high touch, feels super personalized. It's actually even better than having 3 or 4 stages come from just the hiring manager.
That's a very interesting and unique and clever approach that I really like. It One of the things I've been noticing, I've been working with more early stage startups recently, and it turns out like, even though there's more money than ever flowing into VC, it seems like companies still don't know how to hire, which is kind of shocking.
Yeah.
And for these companies that are like really like brand building, and starting to like, they're maybe they have a cool product or maybe they have a cool idea or whatever it is, but like nobody knows who they are. Um, one of the fail states I see is they go from like outreach to like you should work here, and they just like skip all these steps of like courting the candidate, especially when you're doing outbound sourcing. I think inbound is a different approach, right? If you're coming inbound, you're indicating to me that you want this job, you're interested. If I go outbound to you, Steve, right, you don't know me from Adam, and so I always say earn the right to the next conversation.
Yeah. And we see this especially for startups. And it's a two-factor. It's more important for startups because they don't yet have an established talent brand. But B, I think like, founders and hiring managers at startups, they're not experts in recruiting, and they're used to just talking to a ton of like inbound candidates or people they met on campus or referrals at a large company. They don't actually have the experience to know what it takes to get passive talent in the door, right? Most founders, most hiring managers, they don't have experience with like that part of the funnel. And so, they spend too much time trying to evaluate talent when really the talent is evaluating them, especially like as an early stage startup. And this is where actually the data gets really interesting, going back to your question about best practices. We see that like a shorter message length performs better for larger companies. The exception is smaller startups actually, it can pay to have slightly longer messages.
Hmm.
And that's because larger companies that have a strong talent brand, the person you're reaching out to might actually already know a lot about your company. They might already think you're an exciting place to work, but as startups, you actually have to do a lot more work to get people excited. And so my favorite technique there is both to spend a little bit more time on the opportunity, but framing it up in a way that would uniquely, I think, resonate with that candidate. So personalization is more important. And then second, use your follow-ups to introduce more information about the opportunity.
Exactly. Don't dump it all into the first email.
Yeah. And that's where like having even a few things that you can like reference publicly, like a blog post that's taken off or like a fundraising announcement, things like that, like, weaving those into follow-ups 2, 3, 4, introducing something new and exciting about the culture or the values or, your new unique perspective to the market or how you think about building world-class engineering teams through like this external collateral can make a big difference.
Okay, I two questions for you, or I want your feedback on rather, which is like one, I actually think what these companies should be doing is introducing more social proof.
Yes.
So specifically what I mean, you mentioned fundraising announcements. That's a great example. But I actually think companies are really coy around their revenue numbers and their revenue growth.
Yeah.
And I think it's like actually like if it's good and you're doing outreach, like what are you scared of? Like by talking about your revenue growth, like why wouldn't you use that as ammunition? I think founders need to be recoded into that. But what are other examples, if you agree with me, that social proof should be used of social proof that could be helpful in the outreach?
Two things. First, a huge +1. In all of our initial outreach, when we were sub 10, sub 30, even sub 100, like we were always letting the whole world know, shouting from the rooftop about how fast we were growing. A lot of people like startup founders, early stage startups, they think that like by being secretive, like, people won't catch on to them or, maybe they won't be copied. And it's just like, you just got to get the word out there. You can't be operating in secret. And I think that, comes to recruiting. It also comes to like applies to when you're doing sales and, pretty much everything, fundraising. It actually benefits you to not be so cagey about those things. And so we did that. We would talk about our revenue growth. We would share actual revenue numbers. We would talk about all the exciting customers we were signing. We would name drop other people on the team that had really exciting backgrounds as kind of social proof. People would click into those links and be like,
I
whoa,
love
like
that. I love that.
Drew, Jet, and Jacob, all really exciting people from like MIT that worked at Dropbox and Facebook and stuff like that. So that's thing number one. My favorite trick, though, for startups that are doing cold sourcing to get social proof is what I call the connector node. So the way it works is you think about like the 10, 20, 30 most legit people from your network who you know, who would also say good things about you. And that what you do is you source into their connections and you name drop them when reaching out. And here's what happens. Candidates are like, oh, wow, like Steve is connected to and knows Albert Nee from like Dropbox and MIT. That guy's super legit. First of all, you get a little bit of credibility by association with this person that they're connected to and they know. And so you're kind of turning this like cold sourcing thing into a quasi referral, because the thing that happens next is a lot of candidates will then reach out to Albert and be like, hey, I got this email from Steve. Like, what's the deal? Or do you think highly? Are they legit? And then because you're picking people that would say good things about you, they're like, oh yeah, Steve's the best, like Jem's the best, like I'm an early investor in the company, they're on fire. And so the key is to pick people that have really strong reputations, to pick people that would say good things about you, and then probably to run it by them first and make sure they're comfortable. Like, honestly, if they're not comfortable with it, they're probably the wrong people to be doing this, because what you actually want is candidates to back channel, and it turns it into like a warm intro, a cold sourcing reach out into a warm intro. And you can do this with your angel investors as a startup. You can do this with advisors. You can do this with former like managers of yours, former like peers of yours, top classmates from school. And I found it to be super effective. This is actually how we hired our first female engineer, Enos. And then I didn't realize that this was a technique. I thought we just kind of stumbled upon it. But then somebody, this hiring manager from LinkedIn, when he went to start his company, he did it with me. And I was like, oh, cool. So this is like one of the secret techniques that LinkedIn uses, their own hiring managers use to recruit their team. And I'm surprised at like how like kept under wraps it is.
That's a really interesting way to do it, because what I typically do is the forwardable note, right? So the forwardable note for people who don't know, right, is you're sourcing on LinkedIn, you see somebody who looks amazing and you want to talk to, and you want to spend like a big bullet on it. And you notice that, one of your friends is connected, and you ask that friend, hey, do you know this person? They say yes. And then you say, hey, if I send you a forwardable note, would you be willing to send it to them on my behalf? Those are really effective, but they have, if you think about your social cred as a bank, it's kind of like it's a big debit, big credit rather, again, on that bank. And what you're saying is actually just like, well, you have some homies, you can talk, you can use them whenever you want to, and they're not going to really care. And it's a great way to kind of actually like skip that step anyways without putting any onus on them.
Exactly. And then you only spend your social cred when the candidate's actually interested and reaches out to them, instead of wasting it on a bunch of people that aren't going to reply. And by the way, like getting somebody's help with this, if they help like 10 times and none of them go anywhere, that can actually hurt your social cred.
Yeah. And that's exactly the point, right? Which is you just only have so many bullets in that chamber. And so this is like a better way. But yeah, you should definitely talk to that person right before we put it in the email and start sending it out to everybody.
Yeah, I think you want to give them a heads up, run it by them. And, it's also important because like if somebody's like, oh, I'm really not comfortable with you doing that, they might not be the person that's going to say the best things about you, right? So it's a good first pass filter. Actually, so this is what I call the connector node trick. I don't know if you know this, Nolan, but I've done a ton of like writing on how to do startup hiring. It's really all geared towards founders building out their founding team. I've open sourced all of these things that we discovered at Gem, whether it's the connector node trick or how to do these work trials. Basically wrote like 20 different super practical guides with like playbooks, step-by-step instructions, like email templates. It's all hosted on a Notion site, startuphiring101.com.
Nice.
And so, yeah, check it out. Feel free to share it with whoever. You don't have to be a Gem customer. It's all Gem agnostic. It really was like something that I started during COVID when I had a lot of nights and weekends on my hands and wanted to start like giving back and paying it forward.
Well, it's a good domain too.
Startup Hiring 101. Yeah.
Steve, where can people find you?
Yeah. First off, I love hearing from people on LinkedIn. I'm doing a bunch of posting there, as you've noticed, ranging from, recruiting best practices to, thinking about AI and the future of technology and stuff like that. So yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm at Steve Bartel. You can find Gem at www.gem.com. And then, yeah, those startup hiring resources that I just mentioned, really geared towards like sub 100 companies. That's startuphiring101.com. A little bit of like a passion side project for me.
Hell yeah. Steve, thanks so much for taking the time.
Great to be here.